Picture a Roman slave in 50 AD, chained in the quarries or laboring in the fields. Imagine an enslaved quarryman in first century Rome, chiseled skin bound by forced labor, owned as property. Picture a medieval serf tied to the land, beholden to a lord's whims, or an Irish slave on a British farm denied freedom by law. Envision the cotton fields of 19th century America, where Americans were torn from their homes and sold into bondage. A brutal commerce spanning 3 centuries of the transatlantic slave trade. Ancient slavery was brutal, and millions of people were owned as property. In fact, the transatlantic slave trade alone forced 10 to 12 million African Americans into bondage from the 1500s to the 1800s. These forms of unfreedom were openly acknowledged as slavery, legalized, normalized, and accepted. Yet today we do not call ourselves slaves, but we toil under invisible chains. Today many young workers face conditions that feel painfully similar, and arguably worse. Not legally owned, thus removing the responsibility of the masters to us, yet economically trapped and forced to work to survive. Increasingly, a standard 40-hour workweek bleeds into 50, 60, even 70 hours unpaid. Officially, we're free, but everyone who's exhausted at midnight delivering groceries or coding until dawn knows that freedom isn't real when you must choose between healthcare premiums, groceries, or rent. What is up, my guys? It's your boy Jabrark. We're back with another video, and today we're going to trace back the arc from ancient and early modern servitude through today's economic precarity. If you're wondering what that word means, think of the word precarious. We're going to compare Roman slavery, medieval serfdom, plantation slavery, and 19th century factory labor to the modern 40 to 80-hour work week. The multiple job reality, the gig economy, the stagnant wages, and we'll weave in some aspects of biblical scripture, Stoic philosophy, and then we're going to figure out what we can do about this. Gen Z's unprecedented pain and struggle through the modern chains of economic slavery, not by name, but by practice. The word slavery is reserved for the past, but consider our 21st century grind culture. We endure 40 to 80-hour work weeks, often taking multiple jobs just to pay the bills. A generation ago, the retirement plan was a dream. But now, even basic medical care is a luxury if your employer doesn't offer it. We have freedom, they say, yet many of us are as beholden to the boss as any field hand once was. And the boomers settle to lie and gaslight by exercising their ignorance to us about these conditions. They say we've got it better than any generation in history. There's no drafts or wars, a booming economy, and jobs that aren't physically demanding. But the truth is, while we might be the most physically comfortable era in history, we're enduring the most soul-depleting, purpose-depriving, spirit-crushing era of all time. Most of Gen Z by the late 2010s had been coerced to take massive quantities of debt, with almost 43 million Americans, that's 16% of all US adults, having student loan debt totaling $1.6 trillion. Over 85 million outstanding mortgages, with 6.1 million Americans behind on their payments, totaling $12.5 trillion. That's 70% of total US consumer debt. 57 million American households, that's 45%, are in credit card debt, totaling $1.2 trillion. And they say this is how everyone did things when we were growing up. And we were conditioned to believe that insurmountable debt was normal from a very young age. Even my family was in credit card debt and high mortgage debt from the time I was born. While it's understandable that the US government should pursue repayment of these loans, none of us have a right to complain about garnished wages or collection efforts, let's be honest. Even though we were coerced and the loan practices were predatory, money taken out and money spent must still be money paid back. That being said, American society and American government need to face the music. Most of this debt will go unpaid long after we debtors are dead. And all of these debtors will be forced to work until the day they die, and sometimes even their children will have to work until the day they die to pay off what we've been given, even if the loan practices were unethical and predatory. While I was trying to refrain from using scripture so soon in the video, I'm compelled to bring up this passage condemning predatory loan practices. Exodus chapter 22, verses 25 to 27. Imagine, this is the Bible saying this, and our culture is opposing it. If you lend money to my people, to the poor among you, you are not to act as a creditor to him. You shall not charge him interest. If you ever seize your neighbor's cloak as a pledge, you are to return it to him before the sun sets. For that is his only covering. It is his cloak for his body. What else is he to sleep in? And it will come about that when he cries out to me, I will listen to him, for I am gracious. In Gen Z, we might be yoked to a heavy burden of debt. But there's a king who owns all the wealth of the earth and of heaven. And even though the enemy would have you believe otherwise, there's no lack of resource or abundance in God's kingdom. And the Lord can, being the operative word, make a way to redeem you from your slavery. He's made a path if you trust him. Seek him first, and he'll keep you afloat in any struggle. That might not mean that Sally Mae just forgets that you owe them money, but the Lord is willing and able to settle your cases his way, if you can get out of the way. Now, I know that was long-winded for our first chapter, but let's get started. Section 2. Kids these days. Yet every day, some boomer somewhere grumbles, kids these days are lazy. They expect everything to be handed to them. They need a stronger work ethic. They paint Gen Z as weak, too busy on TikTok to understand hard work. But let's fact check that. Hey boomer, your generation worked 12-hour shifts by candlelight, walking uphill both ways to work. Yeah, Grandpa. Fun fact, thanks to the work done by Henry Ford in his efforts to increase productivity and by improving work conditions in the 1910s, by 1920, over half of American workers operated on an 8-hour workday, the implementation of the first 40-hour work week. And here's the irony of that. You remember those ancient Roman slaves I mentioned? They had it better than even the boomers and silent generation did. They only worked 6-hour days with 130 days off a year. Let's calculate. What is one day off a week? 52 days. They had double that, and they were legally entitled to sufficient food and shelter provided by their masters. In comparison, we're expected to work over twice as much as literal slaves from antiquity, and yet we cannot even provide for our own. We can't reasonably, reliably provide for our own food and shelter. Back in first century Rome, Roman philosopher and Stoic Seneca, who himself owned slaves, he ironically actually warns that many people make themselves slaves to endless toil. He writes, "Life will be very miserable for those who acquire by great toil what they must keep by even greater toil." In other words, burning yourself out for a paycheck leads to misery, not dignity. Seneca also observed, "People are frugal in guarding their personal property, but wasteful of the one thing in which it is right to be stingy." We're stingy with our money and our jewelry and our things, but we're wasteful with our time and our labor. Yet older critics demand that Gen Z spend all of our time at work and expect us to still be winning to still be winning at life on nightmare difficulty, continuously saying we're on easy mode. As if stoic wisdom and scripture mean nothing, and their lived experience is the be-all and end-all of succeeding in this economy. But let's repeat Seneca. He warned that people have become slaves to their own desires when they pursue wealth with unending toil. Quote, life will be, for those who acquire by great labor what they must keep by greater labor, very miserable. People are frugal in guarding their personal property, but wasteful of the one thing in which it is right to be stingy, time and labor. Translation, we'll pinch pennies for a sale at Walmart, but gladly hand over every hour for another email demand. And yet we won't offer any of those hours to our children at home, or our spouses. The greatest issue that boomers and Gen X don't want to admit is that they destroyed the American economy in their pursuit for opulence. They manipulated government policy to make it easier to hoard their wealth, and they gaslit Gen Z into thinking that the market is still in the 1960s booming economy easy mode, while we're working harder, longer hours than any generation has before, and we're barely surviving. Section 3. The 40 to 80 hour grind and multiple job struggle. I didn't know what to call that. Here's the modern reality. A 40-hour work week is standard on paper, but most jobs unofficially expect much more. The 40-hour work week is enshrined in law legally. That's a redundant, I know. But in practice, it's merely a starting point for employers' demands. Surveys show the typical American full-timer logs far beyond 40 hours. It's not rare to see 50, 60, sometimes 80-hour work weeks for employees working in retail, tech startups, or restaurants. Now let's be very clear. This often doesn't show up in the labor statistics in the reporting software because these people they may be working under 40 hours in a certain job or working only 50 hours in overtime at a certain specific job. But these people are often working multiple jobs, sometimes 2, 3, 4 jobs at a time, trying to make ends meet, trying to get extra hours. In March 2025, 9.1 million Americans held multiple jobs simultaneously, 2 or more jobs simultaneously. That's about 5.6% of all workers. That's up from 5.2% in December of 2024. In just 4 months, it had gone up by 0.4%. And that's the highest share of the market in decades since they started keeping multiple job records in 2004. People are juggling part-time gigs, second shifts, side hustles. That's over 9 million people juggling 2 or more paychecks at the same time. Baristas cleaning tables, rideshare drivers, childcare workers, or freelance coders working until dawn, all working long after office hours are over. Meanwhile, wages are stagnant. The Economic Policy Institute reports that since 1979, the median hourly wage of middle-class Americans rose only around 6% in real terms, while cost of living, housing, education, healthcare have shot up many times over. Let me repeat that. Middle wage workers have only seen a 6% wage increase since 1979, while the cost for housing, education, and healthcare have skyrocketed, creating a gap that families cannot cross by working 2 jobs, much less 1. We work all week to afford our rent and groceries, but these costs just keep going up. Wages for ordinary workers have barely budged. The result? 2 or 3 working family members in the same household still struggle to make ends meet. Union membership, which once promised a fairer labor land, is at a historic low. Only 9.9% of U.S. workers belonged to unions in 2000. in 2024. Without unions or contracts, few protections exist for workers. Advocacy for sick leave, overtime pay, or even lunch breaks can be optional. Employers often treat us as replaceable cogs. They abuse, they trash talk. They say, if you don't like it, quit, leave. We'll fill your spot in a week. Now, that's not necessarily something that people do say generally, but that is something I've heard before. Spoken to me. This is the feeling of slavery under a different name. Section 4. Union decline and the promise of solidarity. At their 1954 peak, unions covered 35% of American workers. Today, only 10.1% of wage and salary workers belong to a union. Among private sector employees, that rate is under 6%, the lowest since before the New Deal. Meanwhile, Gen Z is the most pro-union generation ever surveyed, with 64.3% expressing approval towards unions in 2020, higher than any older cohort. Now, Starbucks employees have definitely taken proactive action in this regard. By August of 2023, baristas at 356 U.S. Starbucks stores had voted to unionize under Starbucks Workers United, nearly 9,000 workers strong, marking the fastest union growth in decades. This wave is driven by young workers who refuse to treat exploitation as normal. Part 5, the gig economy. Freedom or disposability? And then there's the gig economy, promising flexibility, delivering precarity. Promising flexibility, delivering precarity. I was like, Lord, I can't read. Fancy words aside, gig just means that we're contractors. No guaranteed hours, no health insurance, no unemployment pay if the gigs dry up. By 2023, 1/3 of US workers were engaged in some form of gig work. Globally, the gig economy accounts for 12% of the labor market. And in California alone, 25% of all workers relied on gig platforms. We're talking Uber, DoorDash, Grubhub, Instacart. More than 1.4 million Californians work for app-based services. Speaking of, in California, they tried to advocate for full benefits via Prop 22 in 2020, but the law, funded by over $200 million from tech companies, ultimately let these companies treat us drivers as contractors, exempt from workers' comp or minimum wage laws. That's a $200 million campaign from Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, and the rest to block app workers from basic labor rights. In short, we get the title of being our own boss, but not the pay or the labor rights associated with it. We're on our own, working for the techno-feudal lords that own these platforms, working on their digital estates without any rights to our productive effort. And arguably, the original feudal serfs had it better off, because at least they received unrestricted access to housing. Maybe not unrestricted, but they received subsidized access to housing, food and shelter, and protection from military strikes under their lord's estate. Be your own boss, the apps promise. But the result? Independent contractors who lose income the moment they take time off, fall sick, or need insurance. The modern slave may have a smartphone instead of chains, but the economic coercion is still real. Upwork and other freelancing platforms report that 38% of the US workforce, that's 64 million people, did freelance work in 2023. Many do it by choice, but there are still millions forced to deliver food, coding from home, or cleaning houses just to piece together enough income. Not that cleaning houses or any of this is degrading work, it's very necessary and very noble. But the pay doesn't add up. The result is as an informal, unpredictable work schedule that feels like economic indentured servitude, which is a valid assessment since we're all paying off predatory student loan debt. There's no pensions for Instacart workers, no sick days for Airbnb hosts. If a Gen Z worker can be online 24/7, they're expected to be. Section 6, Biblical Perspectives on Labor and Rest. Through history, scripture, and philosophy, people have grappled with labor and servitude. The Bible, for example, assumes that both wage work and slavery will exist. The Bible, however, codifies work and rest in its law. In Exodus, it's commanded, chapter 20, verse 80. Exodus chapter 20, verse 8 through 11. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. For 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Shabbat, a Sabbath of the Lord your God. And on it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male slave or your female slave, your cattle, or your resident or guest who stays with you. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and everything that is in them, and he rested on the seventh day. For that reason the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. The Lord himself commands 6 days of labor maximum and a Sabbath of rest, binding God's people to a rhythm of toil and renewal. Now, Deuteronomy insists on prompt pay for laborers, warning employers that withholding wages is a sin that will invoke divine judgment. Deuteronomy chapter 24, verses 14 to 15. You shall not exploit a hired worker who is poor and needy, whether he is one of your countrymen or one of your strangers who are in your land and your towns. You shall give him his wages on his day before the sun sets, for he is poor and sets his heart on it, so that he does not cry out against you to the Lord, and it becomes a sin in you. Now, to put it in perspective, if we're talking about withholding wages, if we want to maintain the buying power that the minimum wage had in 1960, today, adjusted for inflation, the minimum wage would have to be $60 to $70 an hour to maintain the same buying power that somebody working minimum wage had in the 1950s and 60s. $60 to $70 an hour. In the New Testament, slaveholding societies are addressed. For instance, Colossians chapter 3, verses 22 to 25. Slaves, obey those who are your human masters in everything, not with eye service as people pleasers, but with sincerity of heart, fearing the Lord. Whatever you do, do your work heartily, as for the Lord and not for people, knowing that it is from the Lord that you will receive the reward of the inheritance. Lord. Knowing that it is from the Lord that you will receive the reward of inheritance. It is the Lord Christ whom you serve. For the one who does wrong will receive the consequences of the wrong which he has done, and that without partiality. And 1 Peter counsels household servants to submit with respect even to harsh masters. Now these verses reflect an age where people were legally tied to their owners, but their owners also had responsibilities to them. 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 18 to 20. Servants, be subject to your masters with all respect, not only to those who are good and gentle, but also to those who are harsh. For this finds favor. If for the sake of conscience toward God, a person endures grief when suffering unjustly. For what credit is there if when you sin and you are harshly treated, you endure it with patience? But if when you do what is right and... If somebody knows anybody in the Charlotte area who can make good B-roll, please let me know. For what credit is there when you sin and are harshly treated, and you endure it with patience? But if when you do what is right and suffer for it, you patiently endure it, this finds favor with God. Now, if you guys have been listening in on the live streams where we've been playing God of War Ragnarok and some other games in the past, It Takes Two in some of those, you're undoubtedly seeing the parallels between this and our discussions about how to store up treasures in in heaven rather than on earth. But I digress, that's a topic for another time. While the Bible admits that slavery will persist due to humanity's obsession with enslaving others, God's principles for labor endure: fair treatment, dignity, and rest. What does this mean now? We're not literally enslaved, thankfully, but the Bible's view of work, obedience, toil, and rest still reverberate and testifies against our current working conditions. God sanctioned a 6-day work week with a day of rest, and Seneca the Stoic warned that chasing wealth through endless labor is folly. Early American slave owners even used Christian scriptures to justify their oppressive system. Yet Christians, true Christians, like Frederick Douglass, pointed out the tragic hypocrisy. Slaves literally had biblical instructions on work, yet they had no rights to the actual relief offered to them through it. Quote, "The slave cannot be said to be the happiest," Douglass noted, "who earns his bread by the sweat of another's brow." The point of free work without rights can look a lot like unfree work. Section 7. American slave owners' use of Scripture. In the antebellum South, Christian slave owners cherry-picked Genesis chapter 9, verses 18 to 27, and other New Testament passages to justify bondage under the oppressive slavery system. While ignoring the Bible's overarching message of justice and mercy, ignoring that the Bible also says that we're not allowed to kidnap people and hold people captive against their will and force them to do labor against their will. Frederick Douglass exposes the hypocrisy. If we ever get free from the oppressions and wrongs heaped upon us, we must pay for their removal. We must do this by labor, by suffering, by sacrifice. For Douglass, true freedom meant rights, education, and fair recompense. A lesson for modern workers, for us, whose wages often fail to cover our basic needs. Rent has skyrocketed to over, I don't know the percent. Rent has skyrocketed to, as of the posting of this video, a median price of $2,000 a month, and yet our wages only account for that much. We only bring in $3,400 a month, and then we have to pay all of our expenses: rent, car insurance, health insurance. We're in a never-ending cycle of debt and repayment. And today, people even live their lives off of credit. We're incurring debt just to buy groceries, just to eat today, just to eat tomorrow. But we can't go on eating our debt. We've got to fight the system. The only way to get out of this oppressive cycle is to fight against the system. Is to state this system is not serving us. It must be changed. Section 8. Biblical instruction for slave owners and the care of servants. This is going to be a long one, just follow me. In the Mosaic Law, Israelites were permitted to have Hebrew and foreign servants, but God laid down detailed regulations designed to protect those servants, to ensure their dignity, and to prevent abuse upon them. Far from a laissez-faire system, these statutes placed clear obligations on masters to feed, clothe, and ultimately release Hebrew servants on humane terms. Below are the key provisions. First, limited term of service for Hebrew slaves. 6 years of service followed by freedom. If a man sells his daughter as a female slave, she is not to go free as the male slaves do. It's free as in like out into the open and displayed in front of people. If she does not please the master who has selected her for him, he must let her be redeemed. He has no right to sell her to a foreign people because he has broken faith with her. Exodus chapter 21, verses 7 through 8. Mandatory release in the 7th year without repayment, meaning without owing anything else. When you acquire a Hebrew slave, he is to serve for 6 years, but in the 7th year he shall go free without payment, without owing anything. Exodus chapter 21, verse 2. Second, humane treatment and no brutality upon slaves. Restitution for physical harm. If a man strikes his male or female slave with a rod and the slave dies under his hand, he shall be punished. But if the slave survives a day or two, no vengeance shall be taken, for the slave is his property. Exodus chapter 21, verses 20 to 21. However, an eye for an eye, compensation for injury. If there is serious injury, you are to take life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. If he injures his servant, male or female, so that if the servant dies under his hand, he shall be punished. Exodus chapter 23 through 20, Exodus chapter 21, verse 23 through 26. Third, provision and equality in daily needs. Equal food and drink should be provided. In the rabbinic interpretation, the Mishnah tractate Kiddushin teaches that masters must provide the same quality of food and drink to Hebrew servants as to themselves. No white bread for the master and black bread for the servant. Rye, you know. No old wine versus new wine. No feather beds versus straw mattresses. See the Mishnah, Kiddushin, Mishpatim. Family provisions. If a master purchases a Hebrew slave that has a wife and children, those family members go free with the servant at the year of Jubilee or on manumission with the servant who's freed. The 7-year agreement. Whether it's at the year of Jubilee, which I'll explain in a second, or at the end of the 7-year slave return. That's Leviticus chapter 25, verses 39 to 41. Fourth, the year of Jubilee and the permanent servitude of the impermanent servitude of foreigners. Hebrew servitude ends after 7 years, but servitude under the Hebrew culture, even for foreigners, ends at the year of Jubilee, which is every 50 years. And you shall hallow the 50th year and proclaim liberty throughout all the land. Each of you shall return to his property, and each of you shall return to his clan. Leviticus chapter 25, verse 10. Now permanent foreign slaves, but with humane restrictions. Foreign slaves could be held permanently, yet masters were still prohibited from being cruel, and they were compelled to consider the foreigner's rights. For instance, remember Leviticus 25, 44 to 46. You can't sell Hebrew slaves. You can't sell Hebrew servants to foreigners, so you cannot sell foreign servants to foreigners either. Foreign servants to foreigners either. 5. A command to pay wages promptly. We discussed this in Deuteronomy. Timely payment is an act of justice. You shall not oppress a hired servant who is poor and needy, whether he is one of your brothers or one of the foreigners. You shall give him his wages on the same day before the sun sets, for he is poor and counts on it, lest he cry out against you to the Lord, and you be guilty of sin. Sixth, New Testament echoes of these rights, the master's responsibilities. Colossians chapter 4, verse 1. Masters, treat your bondservants justly and fairly, knowing that you also have a master in heaven. Ephesians chapter 6, verse 9. Masters, do the same to them, and stop your threatening, knowing that he who is both their master and yours is in heaven, and that there is no partiality with him. 1 Timothy chapter 6, verses 1 and 2. Let all those who are under a yoke, as bondservants, regard their own masters as worthy of all honor, so that God's name and our teaching may not be reviled. Now here's a summary of the key protections. First, the limited term of Hebrew servitude, 6 years and the year of Jubilee. Second, strict prohibitions on brutality with financial penalties for harm. Third, equal provision for daily needs, ensuring basic dignity of the servants. Fourth, basic prompt payment of wages with divine oversight, with God determining the terms of wage repayment. Fifth, biblical injunctions on masters to treat slaves justly, reinforced in the New Testament. Through these laws, the Bible sought to regulate and humanize a system of servitude that otherwise removed the dignity of the common man, of our fellow man. This offers one of the earliest frameworks of workers' rights systems and masters' duties to their servants, in human history, to their workers in human history. Section 9, from defeat to hope. This is our call to action. So is this all just misery with no end? Our current economic system? We need a spark of hope here. And there is a spark of hope. Like I mentioned earlier, Gen Z is reportedly the most pro-union generation ever. Now in 2022, surveys showed that nearly half of Gen Z said they'd join a union if they were given the chance. And they're acting on it. Let's talk about Starbucks again. From August 2023, 356 Starbucks cafes had successfully unionized, a wave driven largely by Gen Z baristas. Young Amazon warehouse workers and game developers are organizing too. They say, we want to love our jobs, but we want them to be safe and fair. Case in point, if you're in Charlotte, North Carolina, come and visit Potions and Pixels. It's a gaming community. It's basically gamer church. It's a gathering of those working in the gaming industry in the Charlotte, North Carolina area. Check out Divine Barrel Brewery in Charlotte. I think it's over by Plaza Midwood. On every second and fourth Wednesday of the month, and you'll find us meeting there. We're not bound by law, we're bound by circumstance. But history teaches us that collective actions can reshape labor terms. This is the antidote to our current exhaustion. Collective action. History shows that we can raise our standards. The philosopher Seneca urged us to guard our time as jealously as we guard our gold, if not more jealously. The Bible mandates fair pay and rest for the worker. Modern organizing has won us the 40-hour work week, overtime premiums, and workplace safety laws. Today, Gen Z and millennial organizers at Amazon warehouses, Starbucks cafes, and tech companies are reigniting the fight. Today's workers in warehouses, offices, cafes, schools, everywhere are beginning to insist that too many hours with meager pay is not our destiny. If millions unionize, if we demand living wages and enforce labor laws again, we can chisel away at the modern exploitation culture. Imagine a future where gig workers have unemployment insurance, where multiple job burdens are eased by a livable wage, where medical care isn't a corporate perk, but a human right. This isn't a fantasy. This is what unions and coalitions have delivered before. Today's movements for co-ops, faith-based worker justice, and legislative reforms are the new abolitionists. The question isn't how much more young people can take, but what we can do for ourselves. Continue to wear ourselves thin and whisper, we have to work to live, or stand up and demand that work dignifies life. We can learn from Seneca, from the mandates of the Bible, from the life and ministry of Jesus Christ, who preached slavery from sin as slave masters, and even from our grandparents' struggles in this young country's history, that labor is only meaningful when it is just. In the end, the chains of today are unbreakable. The chains of today are breakable. With solidarity and action, Gen Z and all workers can build a fairer future. So stand up, join a union, support a co-worker's drive or strike, demand time off, and insist that work dignifies life rather than devours it. The chains of economic precarity can be broken. Precarity meaning precarious. One contract, one law, one strike at a time. Let's not be defeated by the grind, but instead galvanized by hope for a fair future. Thank you guys very much for watching. If you guys enjoyed this video or saw it as thought-provoking, please consider supporting the channel on Cash App or Patreon to continue to enable me to produce without oversight or censoring of my speech, because YouTube doesn't suggest my videos anymore. Please consider hitting that like and subscribing to fight against the YouTube algorithm so we can get these Christ-centered content videos in front of people who need to see it most, and so that we can fight against the YouTube algorithm. And consider hitting that like and bell icon to see when we stream. Did I smash that toe hook in? I think I did. But consider hitting that bell icon to get notifications of when I stream, so you don't miss the discussions or insights that we go through in real time as we go through video games. Thank you guys very much for watching. Have a blessed day. The Lord is in love with you, and it's not abnormal to want fair working conditions in a society that's turned on us.